Bringing Venezuela in from the cold, it is a foothold in South America for the United States.
They don't see this as just like a short-term thing. They really see this as stabilization, and they want somebody who's friendly there.
I'm Marco Werman. Also today, an Iranian writer reflects on U.S. and Israeli attacks on our homeland.
The current war is putting people in impossible positions between repression and foreign invasion.
Plus, the Democratic Republic of Congo is going to the World Cup.
Everybody went out to celebrate. We've been waiting for this for 52 years.
And our National Geographic Globe Trekker joins us to talk about booze.
When somebody invites you into their flat and they bring out a bottle, you're being led into this circle. It sort of doesn't even matter what you're drinking.
Today, here on The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Carolyn Beeler is on assignment. Before Iran, there was Venezuela. At the start of the year, President Trump ordered Operation Absolute Resolve, which removed the president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro, from his country in the dead of night. Then in February, Trump joined Israel in a war against Iran, and Venezuela went out of focus. We begin today checking back in on the country now led by Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodríguez, with heavy U.S. involvement. David Smildy is a professor at Tulane University whose expertise on Venezuela spans 3 decades. I started by asking if he even considers what's happening there to be a political transition.
I think you can say that it is a political transition with a small p. What we've seen is that Delcy Rodríguez has consolidated her presidency. She's changed approximately half of the ministers and put her own people in there, and most of them are sort of more modern, in some cases more moderate, in some cases not so moderate. So whether this is going to be a democratic transition is, I think, still quite unclear.
Just yesterday, the U.S. lifted sanctions against Delcy Rodríguez. What options could that give her and her government that were not there before?
Well, it's a gesture of goodwill. It also has generated quite a bit of speculation that, she could come to the United States for a visit, and it's part of a general process of trying to normalize. The U.S. has also in the past month or 6 weeks or so decided to recognize her government, recognize her as president. So it's a process of normalization with Venezuela, which in itself is quite significant. I think it speaks loudly that they don't see this as just like a short-term thing. They really see this as stabilization, and they want somebody who's friendly there. And they, if we take Trump at his word, they seem to be working quite well with Delcy Rodríguez. And I think this is something that I think troubles, with good reason, is quite troubling to sort of the main opposition coalition in Venezuela. They're just kind of waiting in the wings, and it's not really clear, if they're going to be part of this transition now or in the future.
Along with the lifting of sanctions, we've seen some improvement in investment opportunities. But what is the situation for the average Venezuelan who probably is not seeing that economic benefit yet?
Yeah, that's kind of the real story in the past couple of weeks is that, on the one hand, you see this constant news about investors coming. And I know, just for, looking at flights and going to Venezuela, if you try to get a flight from Houston or Dallas, they're like $1,200 because there's so much demand of people going down there, investors. Wow. and all their assistance. And so you're seeing that the thing is, there's a couple issues. The really sort of big investments that's necessary is going to need the sanctions to be lifted. So that investment's coming in. It's not a wave of huge investment. It's more like sort of moderate investment, positive nonetheless. But then beyond that, the oil revenue that's come in, it's not transparent. There's very little understanding of, what money is there, when it's going to come. So for your average Venezuelan, that means that, they hear about all kinds of changes, but they have not experienced that. And in fact, last month, the inflation rate was 600% year on year. And so wow. It's, 80% of Venezuelans in recent surveys said that they do not see an economic improvement since January. So that's a really important situation. I think at a certain point, people are going to get really impatient. And, so far they've been kind of just waiting and wait and see attitude. But if they don't see some improvements, things could get serious.
On the oil front, President Trump has claimed he has full access to Venezuelan oil. Even if that is true, the industry's infrastructure in Venezuela needs major, some people say prohibitive investment to be viable. How do you see it?
Well, I think that there's a lot that can be done in the short term, because the Venezuelan oil industry is so artificially depressed both through mismanagement and through sanctions. But the real expansion, that is going to require actual really big investment. In the conditions just aren't there right now. If you remember a couple of months ago in the forum that Trump had in the White House with oil executives, the Exxon CEO said that Venezuela was uninvestable. No, and so they've had this reform of the hydrocarbons law, which is an improvement, but there's this issue that this is a long-term project. You got to think of 10-year, 15-year horizon. It's just not an environment that looks really stable for that big investment that's needed, and that could happen, but in different circumstances.
So just as important, it seems, as Venezuela's oil future and cabinet shuffling is the important political symbolism that Delcy Rodríguez is chipping away at across the country. She's removing Chávez's eyes, and she's also changing the Socialist Party colors from red to blue. Talk about these moves and what they actually mean.
Yeah, so when Hugo Chávez died,
he led the socialist revolution before Maduro.
Yeah. Chávez was the person that started this movement and led this sort of 21st century socialism in Venezuela. He died in March 2013, and after that, one of the things that the Maduro government did, one of the many things, was they painted all over the place these very recognizable eyes of Chávez, basically, like a headshot of Chávez, but with just the eyes. It was very recognizable. And the whole idea is that Chávez is watching you, that Chávez is, we have to continue Chávez's legacy. And that was very much, Nicolás Maduro's way of thinking. That was one of the reasons that he had such a hard time changing course when it needed to happen. And so Delcy Rodríguez is coming in, and she's changing a lot of these symbols. Very rarely uses the color red. Now they're using the color blue. And they're, erasing or covering over these Chávez eyes. And so I think, the symbolism there is that, well, no, we have to think about the future. We can alter course. But at the same time, there are also things that she is doing that, very much saying, no, things aren't changing that much. So, for example, one of the big changes is she got rid of Nicolás Maduro's Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino López. But she put in a general named Gustavo González López, and he is the person that, has been there since Chávez government in different roles. In fact, he was a former SEBIN chief, and the SEBIN is like the Venezuela's political police. It's like FBI, and they're accused of torture. In fact, he personally is accused of torturing. And so this is a guy who has a long resume of very anti-democratic, authoritarian, and violent ways of operating. And so having him, named Minister of Defense is a very important position, sends a message, I think, that this is not, a new democratic opening. We are going to keep control over this. Don't get any big ideas. That's kind of the message that I think she's sending with that things are not going to change.
David Smildy joined us from Tulane University. In the capital of Mexico, the main soccer arena, the Estadio Azteca, reopened over the weekend after nearly 2 years of renovations. It hosted a friendly match just ahead of the 2026 World Cup this summer. Those matches will be hosted by Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. The Mexico City Stadium will be making history as the first to host 3 FIFA World Cups ever. Among some Mexicans, though, the renovations and preparations have drawn criticism. The World's Tibis Isaiah has more from Mexico City.
Thousands of fans filled the Azteca Stadium on Saturday. They came to watch a friendly match between Mexico and Portugal. It's the first year since the stadium closed for renovations.
Sí, es algo emocionante. Bueno, a mí me gusta el fútbol también a mi nieto.
Siempre entrenamos en nuestra casa.
A man and his grandson are excited to be here. They got tickets hoping to see Portugal's star Cristiano Ronaldo.
Queríamos ver al Cristiano Ronaldo, pero que no va a venir Cristiano.
But he didn't play. Still, they were here cheering for Mexico like everyone else.
Mexico, Mexico, Mexico.
This stadium opened 60 years ago, and it's a symbol of soccer in Mexico. It's hosted iconic moments and legends like Pelé and Diego Maradona. The initial plans for its renovation were much more ambitious. They included shops, residential housing, and a hotel near the stadium. But the plans were scaled back after residents raised concerns about the impact on their neighborhood. Those concerns haven't gone away. Just outside the stadium, some residents and activists gather to protest on the day of the match.
Bueno, vamos a dar continuidad con esta actividad de los pronunciamientos.
They say global events like the World Cup can reshape neighborhoods, driving up rents and putting pressure on local resources. Water has become a central issue.
Yo soy del pueblo de Santa Úrsula, ahí vive mi familia. Entonces,
An activist who asked to be identified as Azul says he's from Santa Úrsula, near the stadium, where residents report frequent water shortages.
Pues fuimos encontrando que se había concesionado un pozo a Televisa, ¿no? Un pozo que le pertenecía al pueblo.
He says water from a local well is now going to the stadium, even as nearby residents sometimes go without. Water is not the only issue. Montserrat Fuentes is a sexual worker who finds clients along a corridor near the stadium.
La ciclovía quita un carril y pues los clientes ya no se paran.
She says a new bike lane here has made it hard for cars to pull over, and clients no longer stop.
Vienes a trabajar y ha habido días, hasta 5 días, 4 días, que no te llevas ni un peso, ¿me entiendes?
There are days when you don't make a single peso, she says. Nearby, some small business owners say they are also being displaced.
Porque yo aquí tengo 25 años. Mi fuente de trabajo, todo.
I spoke with Jorge Juan Sanchez Mendoza. He's run a small leather shop for 25 years in an underground pedestrian passage near the stadium. He says authorities are asking small business owners to leave, offering them about 15,000 pesos, roughly $800.
¿A dónde me voy a ir con 15,000 pesos? No es justo.
He says that amount is not enough to relocate or start over. Activist Arlene Parlan says it's part of a broader effort to clear the area ahead of the World Cup.
Esto genera una limpieza social donde todo el tiempo los pobres son escondidos mientras la voz internacional voltea con los reflectores.
It's social cleansing, hiding poor people from view while the world is watching, she says. But not everyone sees the changes the same way. Beatriz López lives near the stadium.
Como que fue el inicio para empezar a arreglar calles, pintarlos. Sí hubo un poquito de tráfico, pero es entendible, ¿sabes? Es como
She says improvements like road repairs and increased security are welcome, and that the World Cup provided a good excuse.
Es como darle la buena cara a los extranjeros de cómo es México.
It's about showing visitors the best side of Mexico, she says. Soccer runs deep here. The national team has played in nearly every World Cup, and fans here have followed the game for generations. But being part of that moment comes at a high price.
Sí me emociona, pero lamentablemente no tenemos acceso en los que tenemos bajos recursos.
Outside the stadium, Delfino Martinez says he loves soccer, but can't afford to attend. Tickets for the opening match here in Mexico City range from about $500 to more than $2,700. And that's before resale prices, which can be much higher.
Sin embargo, ahí está el otro problema, puro VIX. Imagínese.
He says even the TV subscription for watching from home can be expensive, so he will likely look for other options. At Mexico City's main square, the Zócalo, the city set up a giant screen for fans to watch the friendly match last Saturday. Close to 10,000 people gathered there. City officials say more public viewing spaces are planned across Mexico City during the tournament. For most Mexicans I spoke with, the World Cup is a moment of pride and excitement. But some say it may be built more for visitors than for locals. For the World, I'm Tibisa Isaiah, Mexico City.
More World Cup news later in the show. You're with the world. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. In most places around the world, if you're there legally as a refugee, you're entitled to that host country's benefits. But not in India. It doesn't have any such guarantees, which puts it at odds with the UN Refugee Convention. It also creates an incredible challenge for the more than 15,000 Afghans seeking refuge in India. Priyanka Shankar brings us a story from New Delhi.
Gulafroz Muradi is a refugee from Afghanistan. She's been living in India for nearly 5 years. She says she came with her family on the last flight out of Afghanistan in 2021 when the Taliban took over. She remembers the chaos of her departure. She says, imagine a playground full of children, and then a wild animal appears and everyone's scared and running in every direction, panicking. That's what Afghanistan felt like in August of 2021. Pure chaos. Gulafroz is from the persecuted Hazara community. She does not want to go home, not as long as the Taliban is in power. I'm scared of them, she tells me. She also reminds me that women in Afghanistan now cannot work or study. But things have not been easy for her family in India. She says her husband has been offered dishwashing jobs, but they only pay about $90 a month, and that's not enough to pay the bills. Finding work as a refugee in India is hard. A refugee card can get you access to some social services, but you can't open a bank account, which means you can only get a job that pays cash, mostly low-paying, under-the-table jobs. Along a noisy, narrow lane in South Delhi, Rahmani and 2 friends have set up a bakery where they sell Afghani naan, a type of flat bread. This is an informal business. It doesn't even have a name, just a sign that says Afghan bread is available. As Rahmani needs dough, he tells me they sell a type of bread that is enjoyed with a cup of tea in the morning. We sell every kind of Afghan snack, including cakes, dates, baklava, and cookies. Back in Afghanistan, Rahmani worked as a chef, but he has found it difficult to find a job here. With just a refugee card and no Aadhaar card, even getting treated in big hospitals is a problem, he tells me. In India, citizens have what's known as an Aadhaar card and number, sort of like a social security card in the US. At the bakery, Rahmani and his 2 friends earn about $100 a month. Most of the money goes to the bakery's rent. We make ends with what we have. Life is difficult everywhere, Rahmani tells me. Then he brings up something most Afghan refugees dream about: getting a long-term visa. We want to ask the Indian government for a long-term visa. We can't get work without that visa. This leaves people who are teachers in Afghanistan working as cleaners in shops, earning very little. A long-term visa allows refugees to open a bank account, get a job, and health insurance. But India's Ministry of Home Affairs only grants these visas in cases involving, quote, extreme compassion. Last year, India rolled out new short-term visas for Afghans, but there are restrictions on eligibility and renewability. Abdullah Mohammed is an independent migration researcher. He says despite the barriers, Afghan refugees still come to India because it has good, affordable medical care and education. And many have family networks here.
So this makes a huge difference because it helps them with the housing, finding informal work.
He says when Afghans move to Europe or elsewhere in the West, they often undertake dangerous journeys by land or sea.
They experience different types of risks, from extortion and theft to physical violence and detention.
But they can travel by air to India, and once they arrive, the UN offers some support, including the refugee card and emergency cash assistance. There are also some humanitarian groups that provide jobs for Afghan refugees. Gul Afroz, who fled the Taliban, was able to get work sewing dolls for an organization called Silai Wali. The company's co-founder, Biswadeep Moitra, says they were lucky to hire Gul Afroz and other women from the Hazara community because they are craftswomen.
Hazaras are known to have very refined skills of embroidery and stitching and crochet work. It is something which they have learned since their childhood. It's their heritage.
Gul Afroz is stitching a doll's clothing. It's pink and green, a Hazara design. She tells me she and the other Afghan women named the doll Noora. When we were young, we didn't have time to play with dolls. Now, as we stitch them, I tell the other ladies it's like being a child again and we can play with the dolls, she tells me. But it's still complicated. Moitra tells me he provides health benefits for the few Indian women who work for him. But for the Afghan women,
it's not possible, but we help them financially whenever in terms of loans and advances and things like that. They're constantly asking and we are giving to look after that. Beyond that, it's not possible for us to do.
Gul Afroz says even with the challenges, she is thankful she lives here and not under Taliban rule. Life in Afghanistan right now is very hard, she says. I was constantly scared I would be killed or my husband or children would be killed when they go outside. In India, there is freedom. For the world, I'm Priyanka Shankar, New Delhi, India.
Still ahead on the show, some World Cup dreams do come true. At least they have for soccer fans in the DRC. They're celebrating the country's first time heading to the World Cup in 52 years. First, though, an Iranian-American author has been writing about what decades of political repression have done to Iranian society.
Everybody is in danger. Everybody is at risk. If one person is arrested and imprisoned and tortured and executed, that terror will eventually come behind everybody's door.
She says the current war is not helping. That conversation coming right up. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Sahar Delijani is a novelist. She is also the daughter of Iranian dissidents born in Tehran's notorious Evin prison in 1983. Her mother was interrogated while in labor, which forms the basis of the opening scene of Delijani's 2013 novel, Children of the Jacaranda Tree. The book has since been translated into 28 languages. Delijani has emerged as someone who gives voice to the suffering brought about by the Iranian regime, both inside the country and across the diaspora. In a recent op-ed in the French newspaper Le Monde, she wrote about the timing of the current U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, coming right on the heels of violent crackdowns by the Iranian regime against protesters. Delijani sees this as a decades-long cycle. When the Iranian regime's guns fall silent, she writes, American bombs begin. I, she continues, am a child of this wreckage. Delijani recently joined my colleague Carolyn Beeler for a conversation.
So I want to start with a little bit of your backstory. Remind us what was going on back in 1983 in Iran when your mother gave birth to you in Evin prison.
So in 1983, there was the sort of the last wave of mass arrests and crackdown on any political opposition and any political activity against the newly established Islamic Republic. There had already been many arrests and executions, but in 1983, while the Iran-Iraq war was going on, there was that last wave of anybody who was still out there, any voice that was still opposing the regime. My parents were both political activists. They had participated in the revolution against the Shah and had participated in toppling Shah's regime, but continued their activism because the Islamic Republic wasn't exactly what they had fought for. They were secular leftist activists. So in 1983, they were both arrested. And so my mother was pregnant at the time with me. I was born in Evin prison, and I was with my mother for about a month, 45 days. And then I was given to my grandparents, who raised me until both my parents were released from prison.
Wow. So you lived with your grandparents in Tehran, as you said, but you mostly grew up in California. Was that with your parents?
Yes, with my parents. So when I was 12 years old, we moved to California to be with the rest of the family. By then, everybody, also including my grandparents, had already moved to California.
So after you had left Iran, obviously, I'm sure you were still quite connected with what was going on there. How did it continue to live in your mind after you had immigrated to the U.S.?
Yes, absolutely. For one thing, my father still lived in Iran for 7 years after. So my brother and I, and with my mother, we moved to California. My father came 7 years later. So in those 7 years, I kept going back to Iran. My relationship with Iran has always been very much connected to those early years of my childhood, so to those stories of prison and resistance and repression. So those were just always alive in me. My life in Iran was very much isolated in this sort of network of communities that was built on friendship that had been formed in prison with my parents, the people they had met in prison. And those people were our community, were our people. We didn't know anybody outside of this community. We couldn't trust anybody outside of this community. That was always a very fundamental part of my identity, the things that I've always sort of worried about and obsessed with over the years. Then once I started writing and I wanted to become a writer, these stories just kept coming back to me. And I realized that I'm actually quite obsessed, with those stories and with those years and what had happened to my family and friends and so on.
In The Children of the Jacaranda Tree, a woman named Azar gives birth under circumstances much like your mother endured. She is blindfolded and handcuffed while in labor. But then your story moves to the prison cell where this woman returns with her baby, and eventually we get the stories of each of her cellmates' families, and we see this ripple effect of political repression across families and across generations. Why was it important for you to capture that ripple effect specifically in this novel?
I wanted to say that when a single person is arrested and imprisoned for their beliefs and for what they stand for, it doesn't only affect them, it also affects their families. As time passes, it affects everybody. Everybody is in danger. Everybody is at risk. If one person is arrested and imprisoned and tortured and executed in the 80s, that terror and that tyranny will eventually come, behind everybody's door, knocking on everybody's door. If we do want to move forward and carry forward this fight for a democratic Iran, for a free, just, equal Iran, we have to think about the past. We have to reckon with it. We have to reckon with all those people who paid such a high price. And then from there, maybe we can build something. That was sort of the idea I had in the book.
This reckoning with the past being necessary for moving forward.
Absolutely, yes.
Do you see the current war on Iran sending ripples across Iranian families all over the world?
I mean, the current war is putting people in impossible positions between repression and foreign invasion, between bombs and bullets. And of course, we feel it here too.
Sahar, in your recent op-ed in Le Monde, you draw particular attention to what happens to children in this double assault. As you have mentioned, they are fearing, missile strikes from foreign powers on one side and the regime on the other. What is it about children in Iran specifically that you want international readers to be able to understand a little bit better?
They're the future, and they will have to bear the consequences of our decisions, Just like in Iran, when I was a child born in Evin prison, born there because this regime had decided to silence every single voice that opposed it, and how it affected my entire life. And I think that's what's happening to the children now. There are so many decisions that are being made for them, decisions that are completely detrimental to their future, to their very existence, both by the regime during this past January 2026 uprising and the violent crackdown. And the same thing goes for the bombings. The first victims were those elementary school children in Mina.
You see this international response to the Iranian regime following a cyclical pattern. As you mentioned, the foreign bombs stop and the Iranian guns come out, or vice versa. How has that pattern played out?
The Iranian regime has always used the threat of foreign invasion as an excuse for crackdown and for repression of its people. And then to repress even more when those threats become real. What can anybody say? How can people fight in Iran when there are bombs falling on their heads?
Yeah.
It's over for now. For now, I believe deeply, wholeheartedly in Iranian people's resilience and resistance. But for now, all of that is completely silenced.
Last summer, during what's now known as the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, you had an Instagram post that went viral. You wrote, "Nothing you can tell me about the crimes of the Iranian regime that I haven't lived in blood and bone. That doesn't mean I want my people bombed." That clearly struck a nerve for many in the Iranian diaspora. Did that response and the volume of it surprise you?
It did. First, because I feel like it should be one of the most obvious and simplest things to say, that we don't want bombs to fall on a people, on a nation. How can I sit in, New York City and wish for bombs to fall on a people, any people, not only Iranians? I didn't say that because I'm Iranian and I meant it for Iranians, for anyone. It's mind-blowing that this type of violence has become so normalized.
Your second novel is due out next year. It is called For Every Person You Kill. And the main character, she has the same name as the little girl born in prison in Children of the Jacaranda Tree. Is she the same person?
Yes, in some ways she is. There's a part in the story of dissent that is always missing, especially when it comes to political prisoners, when they are released and they have to rebuild a life. How do they do that? Life itself becomes resistance in that situation. Just the fact that you are trying to raise your children, just the fact that you are trying to create some moments of joy for yourself and for those around you becomes an act of resistance. And I really wanted to talk about how, from the ashes of that loss and that wreckage, life rises again, and how people try to go back to what matters to them the most. And so Neda is is in some ways, yes, the continuation of the story, looking at it from far, being both emotionally and spiritually part of it, but physically distant from it.
Writer Sahar Delijani, author of Children of the Jacaranda Tree, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
On Tuesday in Mexico, the match between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Jamaica to secure a spot in the World Cup was stuck at 0-0 in the 100th minute, and then Congo had a corner kick opportunity.
What is their fifth corner? Near post, headed down and in! Twanzebe is the player celebrating.
Axel Twanzebe with the decisive goal. He definitely was not the only Congolese celebrating, though. That was in the streets of Kinshasa, the Congolese capital, minutes after the DRC clinched their spot. 1 in the morning and a heavy downpour would not stop the festivities. Adrien Makombo is a hospital administrator in Congo and a superfan of his national team. He joined us from the streets of Kinshasa. Adrien, describe the reaction you saw when the DRC beat Jamaica. I mean, no small feat because their national team is so impressive.
It was just wonderful. Even though it was late at night, and it was raining here in Kinshasa, but everybody went out to celebrate. We've been waiting for this for 52 years. Can you imagine? It's difficult to describe what we felt.
I mean, some of the descriptions of the players on the field just like running in all sorts of directions in disbelief. So, as you said, this win ended a 52-year drought from the World Cup. The team's only prior appearance was in 1974 when the country was competing as Zaire.
Exactly.
So we heard those fans in Kinshasa a moment ago. Where were you when the team won? What were you feeling?
Since it was so late at night, I was in my house, but around the area where I live, I could hear the crowd celebrating. It was just such a wonderful feeling. After 52 years, we were back in the World Cup. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, so you run a clinic in Kinshasa, right? I'm
Yes.
wondering, what kind of solace did this win give people at your clinic who are not in the best physical health?
You know, the next morning when I went to work, the first thing people told me was, can you imagine we are back in the World Cup? I mean, even when you're not physically 100%, your heart can still feel it. You still feel that pride.
So this was a difficult and unusual path. The team had to win a series of crucial elimination matches. And I'm also thinking of people in eastern DRC who are suffering in the mines and in the violence of militias. Help us understand what this win means for the country.
When DRC plays, whether you are from the east part of the country or the west part of the country, we all come together. So people were talking about unity, talking about peace. It's a very strong feeling. Even where there is some turmoil, people were celebrating. So this is just amazing.
Are there a few people in the DRC you know who are angling to get tickets to the World Cup?
I'm sure people are going to starve for tickets, but the tickets are quite expensive, so I don't know how it's going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing some astronomical prices for tickets and really off-the-chart prices for entry to the finals. Is that fair, do you think, for many of the countries?
For African countries, it's not fair, but what can you say? I mean, that's the way FIFA runs the business. We just have to live with it.
I'm guessing visas might be a problem as well.
Yes, definitely. Visas is a big problem. Even for this game against Jamaica, they had to go to Kenya to request visas. So I hope they're going to try to organize something for the people to get their visas to go to the games.
Maybe people still celebrating there. Adrien, where will people in Kinshasa gather to watch the World Cup matches?
Oh, there will be some areas where they have big screens where people can watch the games. They're all free of charge.
Speaking of fans, there's this super fan known as Lumumba. He is the spitting image of DRC's first prime minister, Patrice Lumumba. He's been a constant presence at DRC matches. Do you think he made the difference?
I would love for him to make it to the World Cup because it's a strong statement that he makes, to stand still for 90 minutes. To me, it's just amazing what he does. It's just amazing.
The continent has a really good showing this year at the World Cup, a record 10 nations, including the DRC, but also Ghana, Senegal, Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, all going to be there. What is going on with African football these days?
Most of our players play in big teams in Europe or in other continents. Recently, I heard that Senegal played against England and they beat England. So anything can happen during this World Cup.
Yeah, anything can and will happen at the World Cup.
Definitely, yes.
So what are your hopes, Adrien?
I would like at least for the team to pass the first round. I think it's going to be a big achievement. And after that, anything can happen.
Adrien Makombo is a super fan of his national team in the Democratic Republic of Congo. He joined us today from Kinshasa. Adrien, thank you very much. Good to speak with you.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
As long as we're on the topic of good news that's been too long in coming, here's a happy update to a story we brought you more than a year ago about an ancient helmet from Romania on loan to a museum in the Netherlands, from whence it was stolen.
It's solid gold. It's from the 5th century BC, and it's one of the most precious, most beautiful artifacts of ancient times.
Private art investigator Arthur Brand spoke to us about the helmet at the time. He explained why that solid gold detail put pressure on authorities to apprehend the thieves fast.
They targeted gold and silver, and then they probably will melt it down because these objects are so widely known, you cannot sell them. So we fear that these pieces will be melted down.
Every day they did not catch the thieves, he told us, increased the chances that this treasure from Romania could be lost forever. So it was a surprise today to learn that the helmet has been recovered as a result of a plea deal with the suspected thieves who handed over the object yesterday. They wore balaclavas to hide their identities. The chief public prosecutor told The Guardian if it was an April Fool, it would have been a very bad joke. So the priceless artifact is back where it belongs. Whether Romania will lend iconic cultural objects to the Netherlands in the future remains to be seen. Coming up, salute, prost, and cheers, raising your glass across the continents. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. The practice of winemaking runs deep through human history. It is a simple process. Yeast breaks down the sugar in the fruit, which then releases carbon dioxide and turns into alcohol. And voila, a rich, complex liquid is born. Fit for almost any occasion and best enjoyed with friends. Perhaps that's why winemaking is almost as old as civilization itself. Paul Salopek has been walking from continent to continent on foot for the past 13 years, and he's raised many a glass in that time. Welcome back, Paul.
It's great to be with you, Marco.
So, Paul, you met up with archaeologists in the Caucasus there on the edge of Eastern Europe, where the oldest evidence of winemaking in the world has been found. So tell us whom you met and what you learned about the origins of wine.
In my research, the oldest alcoholic beverage ever discovered, like residues and vessels, is actually China on the Yellow River, and that's about 9,000 years ago. And that was rice wine, by the way. In the Caucasus, the Georgians lay claim to kind of primacy in grape wines, right? They have found clay vessels in archaeological sites that are 8,000 years old that had, when archaeologists scrape them and do chemical analyses, they find the residues of wine. So the cool thing about this is that archaeologists also think that grape wine radiated out of the Caucasus and was carried by people who kind of were not violent, invasive people. They actually brought goodness with them. No conquests, no kind of burned villages, nothing like that. Kind of amity. So there you go, the social lubricant in action.
So we'll get to how wine spread. I mean, the origin of winemaking is kind of debated. I mean, we know that in Shiraz in Iran, more than 2,000 years ago, wine was found there. As for the Caucasus, I mean, what was the kind of traditional way of making wine? What did you learn?
This is what's so amazing. It doesn't appear to have changed in thousands of years, because when they dig down in these Neolithic sites, right, they find the wine residues in clay vessels. And today, Georgians still make wine in clay vessels. They call them kvevri. And they can be quite large. They can be the size of a human being. And they bury them in the ground and sometimes ferment not just the grapes, but also some of the stems that the grapes are on. They give it kind of a distinctive kind of woody flavor.
Did you get to taste any wine made in those clay vessels, and did it taste different from a wine that comes out of a bottle?
Yeah, it's pretty hearty and kind of earthy. And boy, did I ever get to taste it. When I was walking through here, it's you have to be polite. As you know, Marco, somebody invites you into their home, you can't turn stuff away. And so if they put a glass of homemade wine that they've just pulled out of the ground in their backyard, you drink it.
Yeah, and then they serve you another glass, and you can't refuse that either, I guess.
That's right. And then you're on a downhill slope to you don't know where. You end up in, I don't know, Azerbaijan.
How did winemaking spread from the Caucasus, Paul? Where did it go from there, and how do we know the wine migration story?
It's really fascinating. Yeah, there's a culture out of the Caucasus that about in the 3rd millennium BC, so what is that? That's like 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. They had distinctive pottery, and pottery lasts forever. So archaeologists find it and they can use it to kind of fingerprint cultures, right? Cultures that move, cultures that stay in place. And this ETC culture coming out of the Caucasus, we know that they were carrying wine with them because they carried an artifact that spread wherever they went, wine goblets. It was like this explosion of wine goblets. And so they kind of radiated, or at least the technology did, down into the Middle East, where it took root and then just kind of spread like wildfire.
And if we leave the Caucasus and other parts of the world where grapes are turned into wine, we find that there are other fruits that can also be turned into wine. You were in Djibouti in East Africa. What did you have to drink there? wine-wise?
This was really kind of a surprise to me because I'd worked in Africa, but I hadn't been to this part of the Horn of Africa. And imagine kind of a sandy desert with big wadis, these big kind of valleys. And in the bottom of some of these valleys, there are palm trees, the doom palm. And I noticed that guys are out with machetes kind of hacking at these doom palms, then putting old plastic bottles under the wounds. They were starting to collect sap for palm wine, which I had never tasted. And the stuff was kind of frothing out. I mean, they would leave it there for a couple of days and get, half a little bottle, and then they'd start to ferment it. Fermented, it tasted amazing. It was like frothy lemonade.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to note is that I noticed that some of these guys who are harvesting are also kind of reeling around the desert. And they were carrying big knives. So, you just wave from a distance.
How does palm wine compare to grape wine in terms of how it's consumed and the purpose it serves?
It's funny. I think every society has their favorite drink. And we attach to this whole mythology to its kind of multiple benefits, everything from health benefits and to kind of, celebrations of love. I was walking with a Djiboutian walking partner, Hussein, who said, "Paul, drink this stuff." And he bought 6 bottles of it. Man, it's heavy. We're on foot. And he bought these 6 big bottles of this stuff.
That's commitment.
And at first I was a little bit frustrated, but then I tasted it. Hey, this is not bad. And Hussein was saying, "Paul, you just got to keep drinking it. It doesn't keep the mosquitoes away, and there's malaria in this area. The mosquitoes will still bite you, but it blocks the malaria in your bloodstream." So I don't know if that's true or not, but hey, I was willing to do an experiment.
And you did not get malaria, I suspect, but we can't draw any scientific conclusions.
I did not get malaria. It was amazing, yeah. I noticed the mosquitoes are flying a bit oddly.
So as you've been trekking, Paul, have you found any favorite alcoholic drinks on the trail? Or do you have some good memories associated with any of them?
Yeah, it's been great. As I mentioned, it's just I get to sample alcohol everywhere where I go. There's one peculiar alcohol. I don't know if you've been in Central Asia and you've tried hummus, which is fermented mare's milk, right? It's horse milk that's been fermented. And basically, it's like an alcoholic milkshake. It's like if you have a vanilla milkshake and pour a beer into it. It's a little kind of, it takes a little getting used to, but it's incredibly nutritious. Like a lot of these home brews, right? They have lots of nutrition in them.
You kind of nodded to this earlier, just locals who make their own wine or spirits. They like to boast about either the taste or the strength. Do you recall where the hype was actually not exaggerated?
Wow. Yeah. I'll be confessing something here. Maybe it's I shouldn't be, but I buy into the hype wherever I go. It's just I savor it. It's not just for diplomacy's sake.
I'm sure the locals appreciate that.
Yeah, it's part of it. It's always appreciated to kind of say, hey, yeah, you've got the best drink in the world. It's the same as food. It's like sort of the beverage is great, but it's who you drink with, right? And so when somebody invites you into their flat in a city or in a village hut, and they bring out a bottle, that's the magic. It's like you're being led into this circle, right, of trust and hospitality. And so it sort of doesn't even matter what you're drinking, right? That's sort of my philosophy.
Amen to that. That's National Geographic explorer Paul Salopek. His global walking project is the Out of Eden Walk. Paul, thank you, as always, for joining us, and cheers.
Thank you, Marco. Always a pleasure.
You can follow Paul's global journey online. It's all at outofeden.nationalgeographic.org. The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. I'm Marco Werman. We'll see you again right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.